Hello everyone, welcome to the Unique History channel. Tonight we'll be reading from Natasha Dance, a study of Russian cultural history by Orlando Figs, and we'll be reading Russia Abroad, part 3. Our tragedy, wrote Nina Berberova of the younger exiled writers in the 1920s, was our inability to evolve the terms and style. The renewal of a style entailed a fundamental problem for the emigres. If their purpose as Russian artists was to preserve their national culture, how could they evolve stylistically without adapting to their new environment and in hence some ways abandoning Russia? The problem mainly affected the younger generation. Writers like Nabokov, who had emerged naked from the revolution, older writers like Benin thought with them to the West an established relationship and written style from which they could not break. There was too much pressure on them to continue in the comforting traditions of the past, to churn out plays and stories and nests about the Russian gentlefolk, and those who tried to break away were prized or understood. Tustiev's tragedy, to lose the leadership that had sustained her as the rising star of the pre-revolutionary avant-garde, was yet another variant of his experience. Scattered in bush shops, grayed by dust and time, unseen, unsought, unopened and unsold, my poems be savored as the rarest wines when they are old. Even Milikov, former statesman, historian, and editor of the Parisian journal Polizdian Novosti, said, "I don't understand Tasnieva." But for writers like Nabokov, who had yet to find their feet, was little point or prospect in returning to the past. The old generation was dying out and the new becoming less Russian as it assimilated into the mainstream of the European culture. To create a new readership, such writers had to break out of the mold. Nabokov was the first major writer to complete this literary metamorphosis. According to Berberova, he was the only Russian-language writer of her generation, with a genius to create not just a new style of writing, but a new reader too, through whom he learned to identify not with his fictional roles, as the 19th century writers expected their readers, but with the author. With Nabokov and his existential themes became our theme as well. Nabokov always claimed his writings were not about Russia or the emigres, but exile was their central theme. And even if he saw that as a universal theme, as a metaphor of the human condition, the appearance of Nabokov's writings in Berlin of the 1920s was received by the Russian emigres as an affirmation of their own national identity. Nabokov's writings were proof that Russia, as embodied in its culture, was still with them in the West. As Berberova put it, with the publication of his first great novel, The Losing Defense, in 1930, a great Russian writer had been born, like a phoenix from the ashes of the revolution in our exile. Our existence acquired a new meaning. All my generation were justified. We are saved. Exile was Nabokov's omnipresent theme, although he discovered the sorrows and the delights of nostalgia long before the revolution had removed the scenery of his early years. Nabokov was born in 1899, the elder son of a highly cultured, prominently liberal, aristocratic family from St. Petersburg who fled in 1919. His grandfather, Dmitry Nabokov, had been Minister of Justice in the final years of Alexander II's reign, when the emperor had considered the adoption of a liberal constitution in the European mold. Until his dismissal in 1885, he opposed the attempts by Alexander III to overturn the liberal judicial reforms of 1864. The writer's father, V.D. Nabokov, was a well-known liberal lawyer, an influential member of the Constitutional Democratic Party in the First Duma of 1906. He had drafted the abdication manifesto of the Grand Duke Michael, briefly invited to assume the throne of the February Revolution 1917, which brought the monarchy to an official end. He had also been head of the chancellery in the official government, a sort of executive secretary to the cabinet, and had played a leading role in the formulating the electoral system of the Constitutional Assembly. The Bolsheviks seized of power, forced Nabokov to leave Russia, first moving to London, then Berlin, where the writer's father was the editor of the newspaper Rule, until his assassination by a Russian monarchist in 1922. Throughout his career as a Russian writer in Europe, Nabokov kept the pen name Siren, the name of a legendary bird of the paradise in Russian mythology, to set him apart from his famous father in the emigre community. The Nabokov family was strongly Anglophile. Its mansion in St. Petersburg was filled with the comfortable products of Anglo-Saxon civilization. Nabokov wrote in Speak Memory. Pears soap, tar black when dry, topaz when like hell to the light. Wet fingers took care of one morning bath. Pleasant was the decreasing weight of the English collapsible tub when it was made into a protruded rubber underlip, and disgorged its frothy contents in the soap pail. We could not improve the cream, so we tried the tube, said the English toothpaste. At breakfast, golden syrup, imported from London, would entwine with its growing coils revolving spoon from which had been slitted onto a piece of Russian bread and butter. All sorts of song, mellow things came in a steady procession from the English shop on Nevsky Avenue. Fruitcakes, smelling salts, playing cards, picture puzzles, striped blazers, talcum white tennis balls. Nabokov was taught to read English before he could read his native tongue. He and his brother and sister were looked after by a bewildered sequence of English nurses and governesses, who read them Little Lord Fauntleroy, and later by a mademoiselle who read to the children Les Mariés de Solfay, Les Tours du Monde de Contre Vingi Jules, and Les Comédies de Monte Cristo. In a sense, Nabokov was brought up as an emigre. As a schoolboy, he would set himself apart, imagining himself as an exiled poet who longed for remote and sad and unquenchable Russia. Pushkin was Nabokov's inspiration. Many of the heroes of his novels were meant to be a poet in disguise. Nabokov saw himself as Pushkin's heir, so much so, in fact. Even in the age of 18, Nabokov found himself a refugee in the Crimea, where his family had fled the Bolsheviks. He took inspiration from the image of himself as a romantic exile, wandering the footsteps of Pushkin, who had been sent into exile 100 years before. His first published collection of poems, The Empyrean Path, contains an epigraph from Pushkin's poem Anon on the title page. From the Crimea, the family sailed to England, where Nabokov completed his education at Trinity College, Cambridge, between 1919 and 1922. The reality of post-war England was a long way from the Anglo-Saxon dream world of the Nabokov mansion in St. Petersburg. The rooms at Trinity were cold and damp, food unspeakable, and the student clubs were full of naive socialists like the pipe-smoking Nesbit and Speak Memory, who saw only bad in Russia's past and only good in the Bolsheviks. Nabokov grew homesick. The story of my college years in England is really the story of me trying to become a Russian writer, he recalled. I had the feeling that Cambridge and all its framed features, venerable elms, blazoned windows, loquacious tower clocks, were of no consequence themselves, but existed merely to frame and support my rich nostalgia. The focus of Nabokov's longing for Russia was the family estate at Vera, near St. Petersburg. It contained his childhood memories, and in Speak Memory he claimed to have felt his first pangs of nostalgia. At the tender age of 5, when on holiday in Europe, I would draw with my forefinger on my pillow on the carriage road sweeping out to our Vera house. The pain of losing Vera was acute, perhaps more accurate than the loss of the family wealth or the loss of his homeland, which Nabokov hardly knew apart from Vera and St. Petersburg. In Speak Memory he emphasizes the point. The following passage is not for the general reader, but for the particular idiot who he has become lost in such a fortunate crash that he thinks he understands me. My old, since 1917, quarrel with the Soviet dictatorship is wholly unrelated to any question of property. My contempt for the refugee who hates the Reds because they stole his money and land is complete. Nostalgia I had been cherishing all those years, a hypothetical sense of lost childhood, not sorrow for lost banknotes. And finally, I reserve myself the right to yearn after an ecological niche beneath the sky of America to sigh, and from one locality in Russia. The general reader may now reassume. From the gloom of Cambridge, where the porridge at breakfast in Trinity College was as grey and dull as the sky above the Great Court, he wrote to his mother, who had settled in Berlin in October 1920. Mother, dear, yesterday I woke up in the middle of the night and asked someone, I don't know whom, the night, the stars, God, will I ever really turn? Is it really all finished, wiped out, destroyed? Mother, we must return, mustn't we? It cannot be that all this has died, turned to dust. Such an idea could drive one mad. I would like to describe every little bush, every stalk at our divine park at Vira, but no one can understand us how little we value our paradise. We should have loved it more poignantly, more conscientiously. The nostalgia for Vyra was the inspiration for Speak Memory, in which he lovingly describes every little bush in effort to recover his childhood memories and desire. It was a sort of Proustian discourse on this immensity of time and consciousness. Nabokov's memory was a creative act, a reanimation of the past which blended with the present through association, and then was transfigured into personality and art. He once wrote that the exile has a sharper sense of time. His extraordinary capacity to recreate through words the sensations of the past was surely his own exile's dividend. Exile is a leitmotif through Nabokov's work. Mary, his first novel, published in Berlin in 1926, was intended as a portrait of the emigre condition, even if Nabokov, in his introduction to the English version in 1970, stressed its autobiographical nature. Ganon, the hero in yearning for Mary, becomes an emblem of the exile's dream, the hope of reviving the lost happiness of his youth in Russia. In Glory in 1932, the hero, Martin Eldweiss, a Russian emigre from the Crimea who is studying at Cambridge University, dreams of returning to Russia. His fantasies take place as he travels to Berlin and ventures through the woods to cross the Russian border, never to return. The subject of The Gift, 1938, is equally to the gloom and glory of the exile. It is the theme of all of Nabokov's Russian-language novels, of which there are 9. Their tragic heroes are emigres, lost and isolated in a foreign world, or haunted by a past which is as irretrievable except for the creative memory of fantasy art. In The Gift, its hero, the writer Fedor Chernevtsov, recreates the literacy life of Russia through his poetry. In Glory and Pale Fire, written in English in 1962, the hero lives in a dream world of Russia to escape the misery of his exile. Nabokov's thoughts about the distant northern land he called Zembla in Pale Fire reveals the writer's response to the exile. In the first of Nabokov's English-language novels, The Real Life of Sebastian Knight, 1941, the exile theme appears in a different form, to split identity. The hero, Sebastian, is the subject of a biography obstinately written by his father, who gradually emerges as the real Sebastian. This sense of confusion, inner division, was experienced by many emigres. Coldness Ship writes very movingly about it in Sorrento Photographs in his collection of poems European Nights, 1922-1927, in which he compares the exile's divided conscience, the confusion in their mind, the images of 2 lives at home and abroad, the double exposure of a film. Nabokov's switch from writing in Russian to English is a complicated story linked with his adoption of a new American identity. It must have been a painful switch, as Nabokov, who was famous for his showmanship, always liked to stress, it was, he said, like learning to handle things after losing 7 or 8 fingers in an explosion. Throughout his life, Nabokov complained about the handicap of writing in English, perhaps too often to be totally believed. He once confessed to a letter friend that his best work was written in English. Even at the height of his literary prowess, he argues in his 1956 afterword to Lolita, it had been his private tragedy to abandon my natural idiom, my untrampled rich and finding docile Russian language for a second-rate brand of English, devoid of any of those appearances, the baffling mirror, the black velvet backdrop, the implied associations and traditions, the native illusionist, fractile flying, can magically use to transcend the hero of its own way. But even in such claims for of fortunate affection, his achievement is undeniable. It is extraordinary that a writer who has been hailed as the supreme stylist of modern English should have written it as a foreigner. As his wife Vera put it, not only did he switch from a very special and complex brand of Russian, all his own, which he perfected over the years into something unique and particular to him, but he embraced the English which he then proceeded to wield and blend. And became, under his pen, something it had never been before to its melody and flexibility. She came to the conclusion that what he had done was substitute for his passionate affair for the Russian language un mariage de raison, which is sometimes happens when a marriage de raison becomes a tender love affair. Until the revolution destroyed his plans, Nabokov had set off to become the next Pushkin. In a later life, he played upon the image of this diamond genius, even if, in fact, his Russian writing style, which he had developed since the age of 5, had always been as good as, not better than, his Russian one. But once he was in exile, Nabokov had a sense of writing in void. Liberated from the Soviet regime, he began to feel the freedom that he enjoyed was due his working in Vecca without readers or a public context to which to write, so that the whole thing acquired a certain air of fragile unreality. From a world where my poems were necessarily as I've read, I came into the world where no one needs poems, neither my poems nor any poems, for that matter. Where poems are needed like dessert, if anyone needs dessert. The need for an audience was a fundamental motive of Nabokov's which, as he himself explained as a writer, sometimes needs a reverberation if not a response. His Russian language reading public was reduced in size as every passing year, as the children of emigres became more assimilated in the culture in which they lived. It was virtually impossible for a young Russian writer like Nabokov to make a living from writing alone. The competition was intense. To get into literature was like squeezing into an overcrowded trolley car, and once inside, you do your best to push off any new arrival who tries to hang on. Complained yet another writer, Gregory Ionov. Berlin was a particularly difficult place to live, as thousands of Russians fled the city after Hitler's rise to power in 1933. The Nabokovs stayed in the German capital. They lived in poverty, Vera working as a secretary and Nabokov giving private lessons in English and French. But it was obvious, too, that they would have to leave. Vera was Jewish, and in 1936, the man who had assassinated Nabokov's father, Sergei Taborinsky, was appointed second in command of Hitler's Department of Emigre Affairs. Nabokov searched in desperation for an academic post in London or New York, anywhere but Hitler's Germany, and settled for an end to move to Paris in 1938. From there, Nabokovs made arrangements to go to New York in the spring of 1940, just 2 weeks before the Germans reached Paris. In their studio apartment near the Bois de Boulogne, Nabokov locked himself in the bathroom, laid his suitcase across the budget, and typed out his entry ticket to the English literary world, The Real Life of Sebastian Knight, published in New York in 1941. Nabokov's passage to New York became arranged by Alexandra Tolstoy, the novelist's daughter and head of the Tolstoy Foundation, which had been set up after the interests of Russian emigres in America. The outbreak of the Second World War had brought a flood of well-known refugees from Hitler's Europe. Einstein, Thomas Mann, Huxley, Auden, Stravinsky, Bartók, and Chagall all made new homes for themselves in the USA. New York was swollen with Russian emigres. The literary capital of Russia in America, with its daily Russian newspaper, New Russian World, had a national readership of 500,000. The Nabokovs settled in a dreadful little flat on West 87th Street near Central Park. As a writer, Nabokov was not well known among the emigres in the United States. Until the scandal and success of Lolita, completed in 1952, but not published until 1955, he struggled to survive from his writing. Like the hero of his novel Pinin in 1957, he was forced to make his temporary lecturing jobs at other universities, Stanford, Wellesley, Cornell. Not that his financial hardship reduced Nabokov's considerable pride. When Rankophnoy sent the struggling writer of Seven Soul Clothes, Nabokov, who was something of a dandy and a son, possibly best-dressed man in the entire history of Petersburg, returned his suit to the composer. Completely had been tailored in the period of Prelude. America is my home now, Nabokov said in the interview in 1964. I am an American writer. Despite his sometimes rather scathing portraits of the USA, notoriously Lolita, it appears the sentiment was generally held. Nabokov liked to play the real American. Having lost the Nabokov inherent in the old world away through revolution, he had earned his fortune in a new world way, by hard work and brains. The bounty of Lolita was his badge of success as an American, and he wore it with great pride. This is the only case in history when a European pauper ever became his own American uncle, writes an envious but admiring reviewer of the Russian writer and emigre, Vahid. Look at the Harlequins, 1974. Nabokov would not tolerate any criticism of America. He was a patriot, and throughout his life he kept the oath with which he had sworn when he became a U.S. citizen in 1945. When Gallimard produced a cover design for the French edition of Pin, showing the professor's name with the U.S. flag, Nabokov objected to the Stars and Stripes being used as a floor coverage or road surfacing. Nabokov's anti-Soviet policies were at the core of his Americanism. He thought McCarthy was right about the existence of communist spies in the U.S. government. He despised liberals who harbored sympathies for the Soviet Union, and he refused to have anything to do with Soviet Russia, even at the height of the Second World War when it was an ally of the West. When Nabokov learned in 1945 that Vladimir Maklov, the official representative of the Russian embassies in France, had attended a luncheon at the Soviet embassy in Paris and had drunk a toast in the motherland to the Red Army to Stalin, he wrote in anger to a friend, "I can understand denying one's principles in one exceptional case, if they told me that those close to me would be tortured or spared according to my reply. I would constantly consent to anything, ideologically treachery or foul. Deeds would even apply to myself, to the living part of Stalin's backside. Was Makalov placed in such a situation? Evidently not. All that remains is a classification of the immigration. I distinguish between 5 divisions. The Philistine majority, who disliked the Bolsheviks from taking them their bit of land or money. Those who dream of the pogroms and a Romanian Tsar, and now fraternize with the Soviets because they sense the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union the Russian people. 3 fools. 4 those who ended up across the border, who were careerists, the decent, free and loving people, the old guard of the Russian intelligentsia, who unspeakably despise violence against language and against thought and against truth. Nabokov placed himself in the final category. In his courses on Russian literature, he refused to lecture on any literature since 1917, and although in his classes at Cornell, he made concessions for Akhmatov and poetry for Pasternak. Nabokov maintained that the communist regime had prevented the development of authentic literature. He was equally hostile to the realist tradition of the 19th century, which he looked to literature for social content and ideas. A tradition which he rightly saw as the predecessor of the Soviet approach to literature. It was on the basis that he criticizes both Dr. Zyevkov, which conflict with Lolita at the top of the bestseller list in 1958. Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago there as well. Nabokov never won the Nobel Prize, and yet, despite his political denials, he felt a deep attachment to the Russian tradition. He longed to write another novel in his native tongue. He felt that there was something of his tragic hero Panin, the bubbling, noble-hearted emigre professor of Russia who could not quite adapt to his American environment, not only himself and the best of emigres. In 1965, Nabokov worked on a Russian translation of Lolita. In the afterword to the English edition, he had referred to his switch from Russian to English as a private tragedy, but he now began his afterword to the Russian edition by confessing that the processes of translating his prose back again had been disillusioning. Also, that marvelous Russian language, I thought I waited me something would blossom like a faithful springtime behind a tightly locked gate whose key I could keep safe for many years, proved to be non-existent, and beyond the gate there are nothing but charred stumps and hopeless autumnal vista, and the key in my hand is nothing more like a jimmy. The Russian language had moved on since Nabokov left his native land, and the baffling mirror, black velvet drop, the implied associations and traditions which he had used like musician in his early Russian novels were now lost on the Soviet audience.